Another competitive performance, another frustrating result. The Quakes went toe-to-toe with one of the best teams in the league on the road, and for long stretches it actually looked like they'd come away with something. But once again, small moments went against them, and once again, a good performance ended without any points. My name is Kevin, I'm joined by Luis, and together we're the Quakesaholics. In this video, we'll be discussing the match against the Columbus Crew. As we discussed, let us know what you think in the comments, and in the meantime, Luis, kick us off with your initial impressions of this match.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, another match where the Quakes look competitive. They had their moments. They look good. They outperformed Columbus Crew in a few statistics, but in the end, going home with 0 points.
Yeah, and I found this game really hard to evaluate. Being critical doesn't feel entirely fair, but at the same time, you can't really praise a team that's lost yet another match. I think it was a well-contested game, and if a few small moments had gone differently, our outlook would probably be pretty different on this game. Had Judd finished one of his 2 or 3 chances, it would have been a draw. Had Leroux laid off a pass to Judd at the beginning of the second half, same thing. And if both those things happened, this game could have gone our way and we would have come back home with 3 points. The Quakes played well and did it on the road against one of the best teams in the league. And to be fair, I don't think many fans expected a result from this game anyway. We couldn't even beat Kansas City at home, so the fact that the Quakes held their own and competed, in my opinion, is a positive. But the reality is we're now seeing a pretty troubling pattern. We play well, sometimes even being the better team, but then we still lose. We've said this after multiple games this season that the Quakes were the better team but somehow lost. It's one thing when that happens once, maybe even twice, but at this point it's becoming a pattern, and that's really concerning. So yes, statistically you could argue that if we played this same game 5 times, we would win 4 of those times. But at some point, you can't lean on that argument anymore. Being competitive isn't enough if you're not getting any points from it. So maybe that's the real critique and takeaway, that the Quakes are falling into a pattern of playing better but not getting results.
Yeah, definitely a lot of agreement with that. I think the Quakes played a great game. Actually, it wasn't until Columbus Crew played Inter Miami that they actually suffered their first defeat of the season. They've been really good, and they have been for a few years now. They're obviously defending champions of the Leagues Cup. They won the MLS Cup not too long ago. It's a great side. And for a lot of that game, I think the Quakes attacked really well and defended really well. You know, Columbus is a team that's good on the ball. But despite that, I thought Quakes still had a decent, fair size of chances. And in the moments where Columbus was committing numbers forward, the Quakes didn't seem like they were going to fold under the pressure or anything like that. I thought they did well to get bodies in behind. There's a few moments, of course, they scored 2 goals, transition moments here or there where our backline was a bit high. But overall, I thought the Quakes did good against one of the best teams, one of the best managed teams in the league.
It's just unfortunate, disappointing, and frustrating that we can't get 3 points out of this, or even a single point. But taking a step back, the starting 11 did see a lot of different names, a lot of changes. So, Luis, did anything surprise you? Do you have any thoughts on the starting 11?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest surprises for me was the addition of Pellegrino in the number 10 position over Niko, who has been playing pretty good, I would say. It's been quite a while. I think at the end of last season, we've talked about this before, but this season as well under Bruce, didn't get too many minutes at the beginning of the season, a lot of competition or whatever, but since he's played, he's looked good. So I was surprised that Pellegrino got the start over him. To be honest with you, did he show anything to suggest that he should be starting over Niko regularly until Hernan gets fit at least? I don't think so, personally. You know, there are some question marks about where Pellegrino fits in this team under Bruce Arena. They're obviously, just because of our formation, there isn't really a spot on the left. He's not going to probably out compete Martinez or Chicho for that starting striker role. So I understand from Bruce's perspective why he would try to fit him into this role, but at the same time, I just feel like Niko just has some technical ability, some ball control, dribbling skills that Pellegrino just doesn't have in this current iteration of him. And it looked like it was a struggle for him. He got closed down a few times, but yeah, you know, don't think he's gonna be starting there too much. But interesting to see him there nonetheless.
Yeah, and then a change that I thought was interesting but sensible was actually Max Floriani making his first start for the Quakes over Rodrigues. Rodrigues was on the bench, so I'm assuming that he was fit and he was available. We did see him get subbed off in the last game, and I do think that this was, I don't want to say like a punishment, but this was definitely, it seemed at least like a tactical decision. We've seen a lot of comments online talking about Earl Edwards Jr. and, 5 goals conceded against Kansas City with 0 saves. As a headline, it looks bad, but like we broke down in the last video, those goals were not his fault. Yes, he could have done better, but the defense, to me, totally failed him. And this felt, honestly, like a little bit validating that maybe Bruce Arena was seeing it the same way that we did, that Rodrigues had direct involvement in 2 or 3 of those goals that Earl Edwards Jr. conceded last week against Sporting Kansas City. So to see him dropped was definitely at first glance surprising, because this is such a consistent name and such a consistent player. But I think it's just more of what we see from Bruce, that he doesn't care about your reputation, doesn't care about your name. Whoever's playing the best, whoever's probably training the best, is who's going to be playing the next game. And I like that. And I think Max Floriani did pretty dang well in his first debut start. There were some moments that didn't go perfectly. The second goal, it was tough for him because he was getting outnumbered two against one, and the rest of the defense was pushed up high on that play anyways. It's not totally his fault. Apart from that, he had lots of good challenges. He played very aggressively in the first half. I was really surprised with how high up the field he was going, but he was winning all of his challenges, so it worked out. And who knows, maybe this is something that we'll continue seeing.
Yeah, I agree. He looked good. Something we also kind of mentioned, I think, in our last video, seeing his debut. But yeah, I like that about Bruce as well, I must say. That's one of the first things we noticed about him right at the beginning of the season, seeing Beau Leroux, a name that not many of us had heard of before the season started to get started, right? Just him having the bravery to, and the experience. I think that's something that comes along with experience, right? Is to just see players for what they are, see form for what it is, and just making your decisions based off that and nothing else. I like that about Bruce. It gives a bit of like clear-mindedness to the lineup, and you know, it's a competitive team. That's the thing. Despite the results that this team might have had in previous seasons or whatever, it's still like these places are meant to be competitive. And that's going to be something that if Rodrigues wants to get minutes and wants to get continuous playing time, he has to, be up to par.
Yeah, and on the theme of surprises, I think something that was pretty surprising to all of us was seeing that Joseph Martinez got subbed off at the half. He scored his goal to make it 1-1, and then Judd came on at the start of the second half. And Bruce Arena did go on to say that it was because Joseph had some kind of tightness in his hamstring, and they kind of wanted to keep an eye on that and not let it become a serious injury. And Judd, I think, is a player that is very, very polarizing for Quakes fans. And I think seeing comments after this match just kind of reminded me of all of the scapegoating that Ewell received for years. And I will say that a lot of Judd's criticisms are justified. His stats are bad, yes. And if you look at all the time that he's been with the Quakes, I think in like 1,000 minutes spread over the past this season and last season, he only had, I think, 1 goal. And that's pretty unacceptable for a striker, to be completely honest. And he has this reputation now that he carries across games that if he doesn't score, it's automatically Judd is a bad player, Judd is terrible, get him off the team. And I do think a lot of the times I do agree with that, but not for this game. I think in this game, his critiques were definitely overinflated. Yes, he did miss, 2, 3 chances, but he still put himself in those chances. And I think that this is one of those games that he put up the same numbers as a lot of other players in and around his position, but only he gets called out for it. As an example for that, I think Chicho had pretty similar stats, and in the second half, he was pretty damn quiet on the ball. And Judd had, 3, 4 touches in the box, and then all the criticisms go towards Judd and no one talks about Chicho. And then Buddha gets subbed on. I think he had also like 2 opportunities in this game that honestly were squandered. One of them was called off as a handball, but you rewatch that and he was right in front of the goal and wasn't able to get that finish. Why is no one talking about those missed opportunities? And during the game, I honestly was pretty frustrated every time I saw Judd miss. But then I rewatched the highlights. I thought about it some more, and my mind definitely changed. And I think part of that was because being at the game, I went down to the players' tunnel where they're all coming off the field. And Judd was the only player whose tone was of frustration and disappointment after a loss. And I'm not saying that, okay, every player has to be sad, depressed, whatever, after we lose. I'm not saying that. But I think that Judd is a player that is very critical of himself and is invested in how he plays. And I don't always get that from other players. I sometimes see things that, captions that they post or how they interact with opposing teams after we lose, and they're all smiles and they're kind of whatever about it. And seeing Judd frustrated and seeing a player feel the same way that I felt in that moment, it was just reassuring that he is invested in this. And I don't know, I just think he gets critiqued way too much, especially after this game.
It's interesting. Judd is almost a reflection of kind of the team, in the sense of, earlier we talked about you can have good performances, but if the results aren't there to show for it, it doesn't matter. You're going to get criticized. There's going to be fish out comments or whatever. And I think that in a sense that kind of sounds like, or kind of seems like is what happening with Preston Judd, in the sense that he can have moments where he's definitely a fighter for sure, maybe even too much so, but no, definitely, like, when he goes out there, he does seem to you cannot fault him for trying, for putting effort in, but he doesn't score, and the next thing you know, you're gonna read, all kinds of stuff about him. The thing too is to remember, right, is this isn't like a Pellegrino where we paid big money, where we have big expectations, came out with these big numbers. It's a young player that we got, low profile transfer. So there's that as well, and if Martinez is injured, um, then, someone's got to come on. And it is unfortunate, that's just purely results completely determines the criticism, especially like you said, wasn't the only player that is responsible for putting the ball in the back of the net. There maybe is a bit of an agenda building up, or frustration, built up frustration, that just is, anytime he plays and is part of a loss, is just going to show itself.
Yeah, and that reminds me too that looking at stats, I mean, there's definitely blind spots. And I think if you think back to last year when he would get subbed in on games and, he builds up 20 minutes here, 15 minutes there, you add all that up and that adds up to hundreds of minutes without goals. But a lot of those times it's also in games where we're chasing, and it's not an apples to apples comparison. You can't just compare him to Joseph. You can't just compare him to Chicho. And I mean, you can't even compare Joseph to Chicho, and they're both nines, right? Like, they have different roles on this team. One is supposed to be just, fox in the box finisher, and the other one is more of a connector. Chicho can play like a 10. And I think what I'm trying to say is, to the people that criticize Judd, and it's also just like a reminder to myself, is you have to pay attention to what they also do off the ball. And I think one of Preston Judd's biggest attributes too is that he presses a lot. Like, you look at some of the chances that we create, and there's sometimes direct results from Preston Judd just sprinting at a goalkeeper and forcing them to make a mistake. And that has value too, which doesn't get reflected in stats. And I mean, he did that in this game as well, where he rushes at the goalkeeper, they make a bad pass, Beau Leroux intercepts the ball, and then it's unfortunate that Beau doesn't lay it off to Preston, who's in a great position. And I mean, that's another goal that we could have had, and that would have been 2-2. And I mean, depending on game state, that could have been 2-1, and that could have just been the victory for us. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, yes, Preston Judd, his numbers are not good, and a lot of times his performances are uninspiring, but you can't carry that from game to game. You got to be more objective about it, and I think that's what I'm trying to say here.
Yeah, I think another performance as well was Leroux again. I think his assist to Joseph Martinez is astounding, honestly. I think that this is a player who just showcases his quality time and time again. Firstly, there are moments where I'm watching the game and I see players making decisions that I think sometimes it's easy to see from the screen, right? Like, or in hindsight, sometimes players don't make the right decision, but this is a player that I see that consistently makes the right decisions. Not always. He's not perfect. He's still a young player. He's definitely inexperienced at this level, but in terms of his quality, I think that it's something that I personally haven't seen before. A player come from the academy, essentially, and to have like this sort of quality and this sort of vision and this sort of IQ. And I think that's something that I'm very impressed by. And to be honest, I think that something the commentators as well said on the broadcast, just singing some of his praises. And I think, honestly, this is a player that we're going to see get into the national team setup sooner or later, if not by the US, by someone else. I think that he has incredible potential on the ball and off the ball too. He just sets himself up so well to impact the play. And yeah, not perfect, but another good performance by him.
And yeah, before we wrap up here, I do want to just call out that Columbus is a city that is very significant in both MLS history and the Earthquakes history. Columbus Crew are a team that take a lot of pride in saying that they are the first MLS team. And that might be a little bit confusing because the Quakes have been around since 1974, but the charter, or I guess like the rules to get into the MLS in 1994, for the 1996 season was that you had to reach 10,000 season ticket holders. And they were the first team to do that and to meet that requirement. And then they later went on to have the first soccer-specific stadium in the U.S., which at first, like, you hear that and you're like, oh, okay, whatever. Because, like, in this day and age, like, there's so many soccer-specific stadiums. But that really set up a path for soccer to grow. If you think about when they were playing in the 90s, and even before that, they're playing in these large, football stadiums that the capacity is made for, 30, 40, 50, sometimes 60,000 people or more. And at the time, soccer just wasn't pulling those kinds of crowds for every game. And so having soccer-specific stadiums gave this image of the stadiums being more full in terms of, just percentage of capacity. And that doesn't seem significant, but it definitely was at the time where this stuff was going on. And a lot of that stuff and a lot of U.S. soccer development was led by Lamar Hunt, who was very involved with the Columbus Crew at the start of this league. That stadium is now called Historic Crew Stadium, and the reason that it is significant for the San Jose Earthquakes is because that's where we played the 2001 MLS Cup, where we, of course, beat the LA Galaxy. That's a claim that only the Earthquakes can make, that they've won an MLS Cup final against their derby rival, and it felt special being there because it is so important for U.S. soccer and for the Quakes. And I guess to wrap up the video on a high note is that the LA Galaxy have now played 10 games and they are still winless. So yes, it hurts to lose, but it definitely puts a smile on all of our faces to see the Galaxy lose as well. So we'll see what happens next weekend. We'll be playing at home against Portland. Hopefully we see more of the performances that we saw at the start of the season and not some of these later ones, because we'd really need to get out of this rut. If you made it this far, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time. Let us know if you have any other thoughts on this game.
Yeah, thank you guys.